There is not enough chatter in the streets about Interview with the Vampire being the best show currently on television for my liking. I need billboards and someone standing on a street corner with a sign telling everyone to watch this show and give it the full recognition it deserves. Shows this captivating and striking don't always come around, and we should be so lucky to have this series. The vampire trial could have been the climax of the season easily. It was painful and horrifying, but it was a beautifully crafted television episode. Then Interview with the Vampire Season 2 Episode 8 came along and decided to break our hearts and put them back together. How did Lewis get out of the crypt? That had to be the #1 question heading into this final hour, and it was undoubtedly fresh on Daniel's mind as Lewis and Armand carefully laid out the fallout from the trial. According to him, Armand was suitably shunned and flying under the radar while Santiago ran the coven. However, Santiago ran the coven. I understand Lewis is a vampire, and being buried alive isn't the same as it is happening to a human, but that doesn't make it any less painful to hear how much he disassociated while trapped inside a tomb, slowly starving to death. Jacob Anderson is always tremendous, and he especially shined this season when they called upon him to do even more. His blank expression while remembering some of the most traumatic moments in his life was riveting and so disturbing simultaneously. You could see him reliving everything and transporting himself back to a time when he'd felt that low, just wasting away and waiting to die, all while contemplating what small changes in his long life could have helped to change his current outcome. Just typing that out sends a chill down my spine. Considering Lewis and Armand's 77 years of bliss, it was apparent Armand got him out, and they reconciled. However, seeing it play out was fascinating, especially seeing how much Lewis struggled, understandably, in the aftermath of Claudia's death. Madeline was truly a forgotten entity in this whole thing. Even though she was Lewis's fledgling, they never cultivated a bond. It was interesting his subconscious conjured up one of his victims to help him with his master plan, as if he was so consumed with his pain that he needed that push from someone else. Armand, desperate, poor Armand, pleading with Lewis to leave and save himself, was on par with Armand, except he wasn't doing it for the right reasons. Though knowing the truth about the trial and Armand's role in it, why did Armand eventually save Lewis? I guess it's easy to surmise that it was done from a place of love for Lewis, but it's so hard to be moved by that when Armand was an active participant in what happened to Lewis. But before we get into all that, Lewis's coven demolition was sexy and exhilarating, and it couldn't have played out better for him. What sweet justice for Lewis to get over on the vampires who always felt they were so much better than Lewis de Pointe-du-Lac. They were so much better than the vampires who shunned the coven's life and didn't feel the need to form a bond with strangers solely based on their like-minded food preferences. Lewis outsmarted and outwitted them, especially Santiago, whose gigantic ego wouldn't allow him for a second to see that he was walking into a trap. Santiago was one hell of a villain until the end. His coven was in shambles, and he ran through the sewers like a rat while engaging in the worst display of toxicity one can engage in to make sure Lewis knew it was he who caused him pain. His severe narcissism wouldn't let him even entertain the idea that Lewis was going to beat him when he outsmarted him so severely and killed someone so dear to him. Santiago's beheading was like the straw that cut the rage from Lewis's back, and suddenly, his most recent purpose was gone. He was so hellbent on getting his revenge that once he got it, what was left? There's no point in being too hard on Lewis, though, because the vulnerability and suffering of that time isn't something you can fully comprehend unless you're in their shoes. He was now staring at a world where Lestat was walking around, and Claudia was not. I can't begrudge him for wanting to spend time with someone and not be utterly alone. Armand was there. Armand had lied, but he'd also helped him. They had years upon years to try and make things right. Lestat was one of the only vampires whose name remained unchecked on the vampire kill list. And look, I get it. Out of anyone, Lestat would be the one Lewis felt most betrayed by. He watched Lestat sit on that stage and participate in a play whose sole purpose was to kill his daughter. And Lewis as well. I can't forget about Lewis. One thing that was noticeable about Lewis as he summoned Santiago to him and got his revenge was how stoic he was. There was no panic, no second-guessing. And maybe impressive may be too strong a word, but he had to decide for himself and Lewis. He let Lewis go, something he'd been so unwilling to do in the past. Lestat wanted Lewis to live. He was never going to let Louis die. And if Louis wanted Armand and that life, he wouldn't stop him, even if it broke his heart. To think that Louis then lived 77 years walking hand in hand with Armand, not knowing the truth, is pretty damn wild. And the fact that it took that long for him to learn the truth is also wild. He'd seen something nefarious in him and his union with Louis, and hearing what happened at the trial helped align certain events for him. And that first edition play script tied everything up with a bow. Did Armand love Louis? I think he did and still does. But back in Paris, with the walls closing in and Louis someone he couldn't control in the ways he perhaps wanted, the deaths of Louis, Claudia, and Madeline were something he was willing to do. Something he helped orchestrate. And that's to say nothing of the satisfaction he would have gleaned from seeing Lestat have to witness their deaths, his bloodline being decimated right in front of his eyes, and the crackling of Lestat's heart when the love of his life disintegrated mere feet away from him. Louis had every right to destroy that penthouse and take everything out on Armand, but he kept his feelings controlled yet again. And his escape to New Orleans, to his beginning, was such a full-circle moment for Louis. Now, the reunion of all reunions came about unexpectedly, but wasn't that the only way it could have come about? There are so many questions surrounding Lestat that we don't get answers to here, but it's obvious he's been in New Orleans for some time. And he's much less surprised to see Louis than Louis is to see him. They had so much to talk about. There were years to discuss and unpack if they wanted to. But those initial minutes weren't the time to hurl accusations or hurt one another. They were to be free and honest to one another in a way they stopped doing long before Louis watched Lestat bleed out on the floor. The abruptness of the scene cut was genius, because even if we never got another hour of interview with the vampire, our lasting image of Lestat and Louis would be an embrace with the world falling down around them. I can't find a better way to summarize their relationship. Thanks for watching.